Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you to my channel. Thanks for finding me. Look what we've got here. It is orchid time and I try to grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia, not Florida, which would be lovely, but it's not, without any equipment. So no greenhouses or humidifiers or grow lights, really just me and them outside, inside, or not at all. And believe me, I've tried many a thing and they just don't work, which goes to show that I am an amateur. My ramblings are just that, but I post every Friday. So if that's of any interest, do hit subscribe and follow my very amateur journey. But today, bit of success, although mixed results in one case, but we'll get to that. It is summer here in Australia, here in Melbourne. The sun is shining. It's actually going to be quite warm for the next few days. And look, all these things have pinged into bloom and each one has a bit of a story. So I thought, let's just do a kind of a version of what's in bloom, but also a little bit of a care update about what's in bloom. So let's start with the older kid on the block, which is this, Coelogyne, Jannine Banks. Now look at that. Ah, fabulous fragrance. Look at that sort of egg yolky yellow right in the middle. Now, Jannine has already flowered. So I have not had a midsummer flower from Jannine. So it has flowered for me twice in a year, but I don't seem to remember in summer. Anyway, I didn't really notice this because the plant's quite high up and the spike had emerged at the back away from the area where I would normally see it. So I was only just poking about and I thought, what's that? It's a flower. Anyway, so I've turned it around so I can see it, and now I am showing you absolutely stunning. I have a Coelogyne playlist which has got all the care you would need, but in a nutshell, bright indirect light, lots of moisture. There are cool growing Coelogynes and tropical ones, so make sure you know which one you've got. You can find that out relatively easily. These are the Himalayan cooler ones which do really well in Melbourne. The tropical ones I'd have to grow inside all year, and I've made a mistake of trying not to do that and pushing the boundaries and killed a Coelogyne that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get again, Usitania, which is the sequential bloomer. Oh, anyway, still looking to fill that void in my life. Anyway, the higher altitude Himalayan ones and all of the hybrids and the forms and varieties derived thereof, very easy for me to grow. And as I said, I think on many an occasion before, if you can grow hybrid cymbidiums, you can certainly grow Coelogynes in basically the same area. Just hang your Coelogynes a little bit higher. But Jannine Banks is a wonderful variety, and look at the size of those flowers and that beautiful, almost daffodil-y form and egg yolky center, and not a dissimilar fragrance actually to daffodils and jonquils. So interesting. Generally, mine blooms in spring when daffodils and jonquils are in bloom. And I've also just noticed, because I'm a slack orchidist, that this one has still got a flower spike, a dead one. So we've removed that. Now, Coelogynes, as you can see, produce a flower spike from the base of a mature pseudobulb. And it can sometimes be hard to tell whether you've got a new growth emerging or a flower spike. Usually it's the time of year that will tell you, because the flowers sort of come in early spring, and then any growth after that would be a new growth, not a flower spike. So pretty similar actually to cymbidiums in terms of that growth habit. However, Jannine has thrown that all to the wind, and what we can see here, can you see that? Look, that little nub there. So that is a new growth appearing at the bottom of the pseudobulb. So I'm of two minds. Is that a new growth or is it a flower spike? Who knows? Anyway, doesn't really matter whether it's one thing or the other. Someone did actually send me a message saying their cymbidium had sent out a spike now, and I presume they're in Australia, which means it's summer. Is that normal? And I thought to myself, well, you know, if the plant wants to flower, the plant wants to flower and it will find its own rhythm. So I wouldn't really worry about out of seasonal flowering, and it happens in the orchid world. And this one, it's a hybrid. So it's got different traits from different species origin plants. So it's going to do its thing whenever it feels like it. And I am just happy to celebrate the results with that beautiful, very handsome spray. Now, it often gets multiple sprays for me, multiple spikes, and it really is a sight to behold. But yeah, interesting, we're about to have some very hot weather and that flower is still looking great, and very happy to be alive, as am I. So that's our little Coelogyne quirk. Now we're going to move on to this baby, and we'll move that until later on. Here we have, plant lovers, Exhibit A, which is my Lycaste aromatica. Guess what that means? Yes, fragrant. Interesting. Not quite sure how I would describe it. Not overwhelmingly attractive, I have to say. Now, I am still finding my Lycaste groove, I have to say. What I've just realized I've been doing is giving them an absolutely hard dormancy in winter. And mine are outside in winter in bright light, but bone dry. And I've realized that although they don't want much water, they do want a little water, because I've actually killed a couple of divisions that I got, which were different hybrids. Although most of them are just managing to find the will to live again and sending up new growths. But I realized that I kept them too dry. Of course, if you keep them too wet, they are going to rot like there's no tomorrow. So you've got to find that sweet spot. And I've mentioned this in a few videos, I think, that one person's dry dormancy is not another's when it comes to orchids. So some want absolutely no water, some want to absorb water from the terracotta, some want the occasional drink, some want moisture but just less of it. It's quite tricky. Ultimately, you've got to figure out what works for you, and a lot of that will be determined by how you potted it in the medium. Mine is in medium bark, so the whole thing is going to dry out relatively quickly. There's no sphagnum in there, but I've got one flower, which makes me happy because at least it's happy enough to give me one flower. What I want, of course, is clusters of flowers because it will be beautiful. And now I know, I think that I have just got to be a little more onto the watering during the winter period for this. So water, yes, fertilizer and feeding, no in winter, because it's not doing anything. However, what it does do in spring, as you can see, is send out lots of new growth. So what you want is to fatten these up and get them as mature as possible, because the stronger and bigger the pseudobulb is, the more blooms you're going to get. So the bloom comes from last year's pseudobulb. So the plant goes deciduous in autumn, and it has two very spiky thorns just at that juncture where the leaves separate there. So do be careful when you're poking about with your Lycastes, because they could take your eye out. And then you get all of this growth. And like many things, like catasetum type of orchids, for example, that are dormant and then put on all this new growth, lots and lots of food and water in this period while they are growing. So I'm watering this as often as I can, and I'm trying to give it liquid food as often as I can as well. Slow release fertilizer on the top in spring, and then ongoing liquid fertilizer throughout the growing season, always dialed down to sort of 1/8, 1/10. Important thing with Lycastes though, from my experience, is they need really, really bright light to bloom well. And that is best given in winter. So although the plant's not doing anything, it is instigating buds. So in fact, it is doing something, you just can't see it. And it needs lots of light to do that. So that's what I have figured out. Plenty of bright light in winter, not keeping it bone dry, but allowing it to really dry out, but keeping some level of moisture to the plant. But then the minute that you get new growths and the weather warms up, really, really start to water. And when it starts to grow, its new growths really start feeding again. I've got a couple of more really flashy Lycaste hybrids, because some of those have enormous flowers. They're like lotuses. It's incredible. This is a species, which means it's as it's found in the wild. So it's fairly low key, but a really, really gorgeous tangerine orange. So I'm perfecting my growth. And if I have a better season next year, I'll do a whole Lycaste video again, I think, just to refresh. Anyway, so there's the plant, as you can see. The older growths provide the energy for the new growth. So my plant is definitely growing in one direction. Probably up for a repot soonish, and you can probably separate some of those back bulbs and propagate the plant that way. Anyway, at the moment, I'm happy it's just sent up one little flower. And this baby comes from Mexico and Peru. They are epiphytes, sometimes lithophytes, I think, as well. I think about 75% of the world's orchids are epiphytes anyway. So that's the type of care it wants. Again, the medium and the pot all depend upon you. This is what I've got it in, fabulous pre-drilled pots. I'm going to go and hunt and gather more of those, because I've heard on the grapevine they're back in the country. All right, so that's Lycaste aromatica, which is aromatic and is a Lycaste. Very happy that has bloomed for me. But this, look at this. How wonderful is that? Tower of flowers. Now, Yes, you can get much showier specimens than this, I know. But this is a hybrid. So this one is called, and it's a very, very famous cross, it's Dendrobium Bohemian Rhapsody, as in the Queen song. And it's a cross between Dendrobium aphyllum and Lycaste, which you can probably see from the flower shape and form. So Lycaste comes from southern China, Laos, so that little pocket of Southeast Asia, whereas aphyllum basically goes all the way from Nepal all the way down Southeast Asia, down the Malay Peninsula. So it has a really, really broad range. So a lot of those, I mean, I'm calling it Himalayan, but in fact it's not because it stretches so far away. So these are relatively high altitude and like cooler temperatures, they're mountain orchids, they're a little higher altitude. However, they do have quite marked dry seasons. So for me, again, a bit like Lycaste, finding that sweet spot between its winter care and its summer care. Summer is easy, the warmer season's easy, plenty of water, plenty of food, ping, ta-da. The difficulty for me has been keeping these alive and healthy throughout my winter because I'm growing these outside all year. Probably they might be better off coming inside. It might just get a little too cold in winter for me out there, for them out there. So they're undercover, they're protected from the rain, and the trick is for me, so you can see all the new growths just starting to appear at the bottom of the plant there. So I think the most important thing for me is to get those canes to mature in the growing cycle, so before the weather starts to get cold in autumn. So it's early summer now and it's sending up lots of new growth, which is great. Hopefully they'll have a chance to grow long and mature. Because what I have experienced is, particularly with younger plants, they can just rot in winter and just not make it through. So you've got to get that sweet spot, or just grow them inside, Matthew. Maybe that's the easier thing. Move them inside. So the flowers, very, very faint fragrance, but aren't they just so beautiful? And I was thrilled to see this coming into bloom. So Dendrobium, I mean, a lot of this type of Dendrobium, soft canes, will need bright indirect light, particularly in winter, while they're deciding to flower or not for you. And many of them will want a dry-ish or completely dry winter or autumn, depending on which species you've got, and then they'll generally want a bit more, well, the water to kicking again in spring and summer, and then they go into a more dry cycle, autumn and winter. So just have a look at what you've got. Now, this is a hybrid. A great way to find out the ancestor species of your hybrid is to go to orchidroots.com. Put in the name of your hybrid, and that ultimately will tell you the family tree, and you can find out by then Googling the two or the multiple species ancestors what those care and conditions were like for those species plants, and that will give you an idea of whether it does have a dry dormancy in winter or whether it's one of those plants that wants to be continually moistish throughout the year. So Dendrobiums for me, not as straightforward as one would think. I thought they'd just all love life here for me. Some have, some haven't, but this certainly has got through its first winter with me and it's bloomed very well. These old canes can still produce flowers, so don't be tempted to trim them off. And you can see it is also producing keikis. Now that will be its Lycaste blood. Now I've made a video about Dendrobium Lycaste, and that's almost a miniature Dendrobium, and it has this tangled form whereby it produces keikis obsessively, and it's just like a tangled mass. And when I was first growing it, I thought, oh, I'm just giving it the wrong care, because generally keikis are a sign that the plant is getting too much water, not enough light, things are going on, and it's trying to sort of replicate itself to move into a better condition. But no, Lycaste, that's just what it does. So you end up with this tangled mass of a small plant. Looks great, and each of those keikis can bloom, so the whole thing is just a tangled mass of roots and plant and flowers. It's gorgeous. So I think Bohemian Rhapsody has certainly exhibiting some of its Lycaste ancestry traits. And there are a few forms of this. I have got a white form as well, which got a few flowers, which is great. And this one looks much more like the aphyllum flowers, doesn't it? Beautiful, beautiful thing. So once again, I'm just really glad it's flowered for me. Fertilizer, pretty much the same as everything else. Nothing in winter. slow release fertilizer pellets in spring, liquid fertilizer throughout the growing season to try and really encourage these new growths to mature. Before it gets cold, if they're still green and they haven't sort of hardened up, they're going to rot, I found. So that's the game, trying to keep it happy and healthy until everything has grown up and can survive the winter. Now, as you can see, the flower buds are initiated just at the nodes of where leaves had been on the cane. So the flowering canes have become deciduous from the top, but not completely deciduous. So this one's still got some leaves at the bottom. So is this one. So very much the older canes start to shed their leaves, and they're the ones that are going to give you flowers. But as I said, the older canes might still bloom, so don't be too tempted to trim those off prematurely. But that is where the flowers, let me turn that around, are initiated from. So you'll get a little bump just at that old leaf node, and that's where the flowers will come if they're going to. So there we are, plant lovers. 3 interesting things in bloom. Fabulous Coelogyne, Lycaste, work in progress. These sort of soft cane, Himalayan-ish, Southeast Asian Dendrobiums, work in progress, but this one is certainly loving the conditions I gave it this year. Anyway, I hope wherever you are, all is well and that things are flowering for you that might not have flowered before. It's a challenge, it really is. And I will say there isn't one right way to grow anything. We've all got to try and figure out what works for us, whether that's the pot you use, the medium you use, the plants you grow, whether they're inside or outside, the amount of light they get. Honestly, it is so varied that even someone in the same city will have very different growing processes and have great results. So you just got to figure out what works for you, I guess, while looking at some of the base information that you can to understand what either the species or the species ancestors like in their original habitat. So there you go. Really take whatever I've just said with a grain of salt. Ultimately, that means find your own way. Anyway, that's really why I started this channel, to try and nail down some of the things that I had learned, because it's just quite tricky to find information. But anyway, pick and choose as you go and see what works for you. And I hope what works for you next week will be tuning into me on Friday. So hit subscribe if you want to know what that is. I don't know yet, because I don't know yet. Anyway, I look forward very much to seeing you next week. I hope all is well. Take care where you are, and I'll see you soon.